very first thing he saw were perfectly tan legs and green high heels. Bright green, the kind of green that sparkled under stage lights and lit up from illuminated floor panels. Monson stared at the shoes. Those were so not the heels Miss Miranda was wearing. His eyes stared at the sharp point of the heel, tracing it up the ankle and perfectly rounded calf muscle. That calf muscle bulged rhythmically as its owners shifted their weight. His mind started to wander, but he tore it back, pressing forward with his determined discovery. He continued up the calf to the lower thigh until his gaze fell upon the frayed flare of soft, creamy material. He gaped at the hem of the miniskirt, realization smacking him like a sledgehammer. His lids snapped closed and his head turned to the side as his cheeks burst into embarrassed color. He spoke to Taurus Green with his eyes glued shut. "Taurus, how are you?" Taurus sounded highly amused as she answered, "I'm fab. And yourself?" "My back and head hurt, but besides that, I'm just peachy." "Yeah? Does your back and head have anything to do with you being on the floor?" Monson spoke with watering eyes. Yeah. I tripped right before you got here." "Oh, that's no fun." He laughed. "No, not at all." An awkward silence followed. Well, that was not entirely true. It was awkward for him. On the other hand, by the way Taurus was trying to hold back the giggles, he could tell she was enjoying herself. The patter of shuffling steps told him that she was moving. Relief washed over him. "Good. She's finally figured out why I'm squeezing my eyes shut," he thought. He opened his eyes and started to speak, only to see the same pair of tan legs, even closer than before, literally right next to his face. They were so close, he could smell the christened touch of suntan oil and perfumed lotion. He dared not straighten up, very much afraid of what he might see if he did. Monson found a small blemish on the floor to occupy his attention. Taurus, what are you—" She spoke from somewhere above him, moving her legs slightly as she did. The touch of smooth, warm skin crested his face. "Monson, why do you seem so fidgety?" She sniffed as if she were about to start crying. "And I came all the way over here to see you. Didn't you miss me?" "Curse you, you red-headed devil woman," he thought. She was totally teasing him, getting a thorough kick out of his embarrassment. "You know dang well why I'm fidgety. Could you move, please?" "Monson Grey, you weren't looking at my skirt, were you?" She attempted to sound scandalized, hitting the front of her dress in a very Marilyn Monroe maneuver. "You do realize that would make you a pervert, right? Going around looking up girls' skirts. Aren't you the bad boy?" "That's rich. You stand over me wearing a sundress and somehow that turns me into a pervert? Yeah, that makes total sense." "Hello, it's not a sundress." "Whatever." Taurus giggled. "Are you sure you want me to move? You do realize who's standing over you, right? You may not get another opportunity like this." Monson tried not to let his jaw drop. There was teasing, but what she was doing was just plain mean. Messing with the heart of an innocent boy. Unforgivable. He knew she was playing with him. Even so, he could not stop his face from going a deeper shade of red. "I know exactly who you are, and if you don't move, I'm going to take a picture and sell it on eBay." "Oh, you're no fun." She gave a little pouty whimper as she started to back away. He slowly got to his feet as she did. "You know, Monson, you are unlike anyone I've ever met." He lifted his eyebrow. He was not sure that was a compliment. She continued. "I mean, you have to be the only boy in existence that would tell a hot little piece like me to get off him." She let out an exaggerated sigh. "I must be losing my touch." Monson rolled his eyes, feeling the red from his face drain as she backed away. "First of all, you weren't on top of me." "Practically." He put his hand to his forehead, feeling weary. This girl really tuckered him out. Second? Who seriously calls themselves a hot little piece? Haven't you ever heard of women's lib? Isn't that a show on the Food Network? Monson felt the tiredness take on a whole new meaning, even as he started to chuckle. Taurus joined, but it sounded a bit on the forced side, like she was not sure why she was laughing. It's great to see you, Taurus, Monson said, relenting to the feeling. It was really great to see her. But why are you here? Aren't you supposed to be performing at some sort of award show? Taurus nodded. Yeah, but something bigger came up, so I had to back out. Back out? Thought Monson. Are you allowed to do that? It was then that Monson noticed the obscurity of Taurus's dress. Not that he was completely oblivious to it before, but now he could see it in its entirety, and was sure he was not going to be exposed to anything inappropriate. The chime of his phone signaled the arrival of a text message. It was from Artorius. Dude, get moving. This thing is about to start. Apparently, we're going to find out who Molly's mystery visitor is. Move your butt. Monson stared at the message, his face going slack, his mind starting to race. Why was Artorius getting all worked up? It was like Casey had said. Who could possibly be visiting? A gust of suspicion suddenly filled his mind as dots started to connect. The MIBs, Molly's visitor, Miss Blake, and the heavy-voiced man. It all had to do with the assembly. They were all related. The extra security was not because of what happened to the diamond. It was for this unknown visitor. But that begged the question, who were they? I know who's coming. Monson glanced to his side to see Taurus leaning in and looking at his phone. He almost took a step back. She was again a little too close. He righted himself before he spoke. You know who's coming? She nodded her head, beaming. Yep, I've known for some time now. Apparently he's a fan. That's why I'm dressed like that. She winked at him. Bingo. I knew you were smart, even if you don't take advantage of good opportunities. She sighed again unexpectedly. You know, Monson, you're going to make a pop star feel bad about herself. At the very least, you could stare at my cleavage while you talk to me. Taurus! She started to giggle again. Anyway, our visitor is also a fan of Damien, though this is second-hand information, just what I heard from my manager. Apparently Damien and I are doing dinner after my show. Monson interrupted again, confused as to what Taurus was talking about. You're gonna go to dinner with Damien? Where are your reservations? The hospital lunchroom? Taurus cocked her head, giving him a sideways glance. His eyes went wide. What, you don't know? Her eyes went just as wide. Know what? Taurus asked the question, but Monson could see the truth reflected in her eyes. She really did not know. Monson answered. Damien, the Diamond Peterson, was attacked last week. He's in the hospital. It's been all over gossipguyblog.com. Taurus rolled her eyes. No wonder. I never get on that dumb site. At least, not after last year. What happened last year? Oh, never mind. She touched her lips as a gentle but odd expression crept onto her face. He's in the hospital? Who attacked him, and why? What about the team? Don't we have a huge game coming up? The Bulldogs. Yeah, that's right. Don't we play the Bulldogs? What are they? Monson touched her hand, which surprised both of them. Taurus, relax. He felt the tremble of hot skin and watched for a second time as Taurus's face altered dramatically. The expression was very different, but equally enigmatic. It felt overtly genuine, like maybe he was catching a glimpse of the inner Taurus. This thought caused him to reflect. Was the Taurus that sat next to him in Mr. Gatt's class somehow fake? He raised his eyebrow without even realizing it. What an interesting thought. Regardless, Taurus's concern really threw Monson off. He never knew she liked football so much. Taurus turned on her heel and tried to take off a little faster than her pointy shoes would allow. Monson reacted as she started to slip, grabbing her around the waist and wrapping her up. "I've got you, Taurus." Her form went rigid, but at the same time reacted instinctively as she grabbed onto his arm for dear life. A puff of embarrassed breath sailed through the air as he pulled her upright. He moved her slowly, carefully drawing her into him so she could regain her balance. She pressed up right against him. Adrenaline-infused senses heightened his cognizance, flooding his mind with an overload of sensory information. He felt the beat of a pounding heart echo and reverberate within her, pumping so fast it felt as if her blood was a continuous flow instead of a steady pulse. He could feel the dull pull of strained, quickened breath and the steady increase of body temperature. "Taurus, this is so unlike you." Surprising words. Monson did not know where they came from. Taurus answered, "What do you mean?" "It's unlike you to get so ruffled. I wonder why that is." His voice trailed off. "Like I said, Monson, you really are unlike anyone I've ever met." Taurus moved out away from him, slightly pulling at her neck nervously. She quickly adjusted her expression and body language, rapidly falling back into the confident, bulletproof Taurus Green everyone knew and loved. Monson let her slide out of his arms and watched her adjust her top and skirt, which were now completely disheveled. She smoothed everything out, from her clothes to her attitude. "I'm performing later." She forced a smile. "Make sure you're watching." Taurus turned on her heel, doing that little booty shake thing that Artorius was so fond of. Monson watched her leave, thinking about the confident, bulletproof Taurus Green, and feeling that maybe she was not as bulletproof as he thought. After his conversation with Taurus, Monson hightailed it to the modern Coliseum, which looked more like the crazy confusion of a Disney Stars reunion concert than a school assembly. He navigated reporters, news vans, parents, and others, doing his best to remain unseen and unnoticed. As he entered the hall, a quick phone call to Artorius told him where they were sitting. It seemed the school provided a student section for just such an occasion, though Monson still did not know what this particular occasion was. He breached the ground level of the Coliseum, taking a half-second to peer towards the stage and lower levels. What he saw jarred him in the most curious of ways. The massive auditorium-like space was completely transformed. The platform had a sentinel-like dome propped directly on top of it. It was the kind of dome you might see at one of those outdoor amphitheaters, the ones that orchestras often used. In that amphitheater fashion, the dome sat high on the sunken floor of the Coliseum, giving off an almost eerie light from its concaves. The platform was also bigger than he remembered, easily double, if not triple the size of the one used at orientation so many weeks ago. Large projection screens sat to the left, right, and above the half-dome space, with computerized art of manipulated colors and shapes trickling through them. The atmosphere and set looked, felt, and just was completely different from orientation. This engineering masterpiece was astonishing on a variety of levels, so much so, Monson was having problems comprehending it. The massive crowds of people were not helping either. Monson simply marveled at the scene. The buzz of excitement rent the air as Monson drowned in the growing number of excited individuals. He fought against the current and was finally able to find Casey and Artorius. "Is that just me, or do we always seem to be waiting for you?" Monson joined the two in one of the last rows. Thankfully, they were alone, and even a ways off from some of the other students, though the way people were filling in, he was sure that would change. He sat down on the opposite side of Artorius, who, like always, was on his phone. "Sorry about that. Maybe you should have come with me. Then you wouldn't have to wait. Did you guys finally figure out which was better, Mac or PC?
I totally won that argument.
Both Casey and Artorius said in the exact same tone and inflection. They glared at each other. That's what I thought. Monson turned his attention to the growing crowd of students. So, have they said anything about what's going on?
Not yet.
Artorius turned his attention back to his phone.
But many of the music students are getting ready to perform. I saw the guys from NSYNC 2 and Backstreet Reborn practicing moves earlier. The Juilliard guy's apparently debuting today too.
Artorius gestured towards Casey.
What's his name again? I always forget. Boston Timberland. He's super annoying. I can't stand the dude.
You know him?
Casey nodded. Yeah, I met him last year at Taurus Green's concert at the Gorge. He was one of our backup dancers, but he's one of those people that has a little talent and a lot of connections. He's not a bad dancer from what I saw. Not that I would know. But singing is a different story. When he sings, it sounds like he's murdering a chicken. Should be entertaining at least.
Monson scratched at his head, perplexed. They wouldn't have stopped classes for a week, added extra security, and then gathered us all together just for some jumped-up talent show. There's something else going on here.
They're probably announcing the candidates for the spring solstice.
Monson and Artorius leaned out from their seat, peering around Casey, who was struggling to see over his shoulder. Indigo sat down next to Casey, throwing her feet up in a very unfeminine way. She was conspicuously by herself. Monson let loose a gentle smile when he saw this. It was nice to know that Indigo was comfortable with them. Casey answered at once when he saw who it was.
No way, little Harrison. It's too early for candidates to be announced. It's months away. And besides, the school senate hasn't even brought the issue up.
Indigo started to answer, but almost immediately stopped. She glanced skyward, thinking.
You could be right, Case. I guess I hadn't thought of that.
She turned her gaze back towards Casey.
The sponsors, then?
Casey threw his arms up around his head.
Now that's possible. I wouldn't be surprised if they announced the sponsors for the spring solstice and for the Repeaters project.
Okay, you two, stop right there. You need to explain. What are the spring solstice and Repeaters project?
I got this one, guys.
Artorius spoke without looking up from his phone.
The spring solstice is the dance at Collin. It's kind of hard to explain if you've never seen it. Do you know what a prom is, Grey?
Monson glared at an unflinching Artorius, who was just tapping away at the web browser on his iPhone screen. Fortuitously, Indigo seemed to either miss the question or did not care enough to make the connection, as she did not ask any questions. Monson gave Artorius a soft kick, one hard enough that he quickly turned to glare at Monson. Monson's face was enough to convey the message. Artorius' response was equally silent.
Sorry, Grey.
Monson smiled lightly. It's okay. I forgive you. Artorius continued, giving no indication that a silent exchange had just transpired.
Anyway, the spring solstice is like a normal high school prom, a class function for dignitaries, the Grammys, and a rock concert, all wrapped up into one. It's the high point of Corrin's social season.
Monson took in this new piece of information and found that he was not surprised. Rich people were really good at two things: wasting resources and blowing things out of proportion. Considering such, it made sense that Corrin would take something simple, like a dance, and turn it into some sort of spectacle. At least he would not have to. Monson's face soured, as a thought of alarming gravity hit him. The Horumvir. The school was not going to have him participate. Were they?
Relax, Grey. Not even you could get mixed up in this one,
said Indigo, reading his face.
The students have to nominate you, then someone in the school senate has to back you. Freshmen almost never get nominated, even really popular ones.
A pout so slight, Monson had to wonder if Indigo even knew she was doing it, poured onto her face.
She slid a strand of hair behind an ear, a gesture that was uncharacteristically close to one of Cyan's nervous tells. Cyan popped to the front of Monson's mind, her face dominating his mind's eye like a 100-car pileup. He did his best to figuratively look away. She was the last person he wanted to think about. More for severely needed distraction than a genuine desire for real information, Monson asked, "What about the Repeaters Project? What's that?" Casey spoke up. "The Repeaters Project is sort of a rejuvenation project for the Valley and other buildings on campus. The school wasn't always the pinnacle of rich private education, and the Valley hasn't always been for the super elite. This Valley has a long history, most of which I don't know, so I can't give you any of the details. However, what I can say is that every year a new project is done on the campus. That's where the field, barracks, and even this building came from. Many of the richest people in the world have kids attending this school, so they're always trying to outdo one another." "Wow." Monson propped his chin up on his fist, steadying it with his knee. "I didn't know any of that." "Not surprising. You are a scholarship student." A sultry voice, easily recognized, sprang out from the ridiculously expensive speaker system. Everyone in the hall immediately fell silent, like Mr. Gatt was holding the remote control to the student body's vocal cords. "Good morning, students. I welcome you to this morning's assembly and thank you for your patience in dealing with the extraordinary events of the last week. I am truly jubilant to tell you that your long wait of pondering unanswered questions is at an end. We have a very exciting guest here with us, with a very exciting announcement. However, before we move to that, how about we wake you all up?" The question hung before the students, falling upon them like the calming plush of raindrops. The students did not understand. Mr. Gatt smiled. "In the words of the great Andrew Lloyd Webber, I think we are in need of a little illumination." Mr. Gatt paused and shifted his body weight dramatically as flames shot up from the floor and Mr. Gatt disappeared. The Coliseum broke into music, and not just any music, but the well-known score of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera. The prelude crashed into the unsuspecting students and spectators, waking the perpetually sleeping and caffeine-dependent. The music was different, though, far different than the original Broadway masterpiece. Its beat was funkier, jumbled, and synthesized. The snap and pop of drums rolled opposite of electric guitars, both of which coursed through tweeters and subwoofers, filling the space with a body-beating bass and tummy-turning treble, causing, almost forcing the crowd to their feet. Trapdoors from the floor opened to reveal the rising figures of not one, but two boy bands. Apparently the years of animosity between the empires that were NSYNC and Backstreet Boys had finally been put to rest. "It's a truly joyful day for past and present teeny boppers all over America. No, the world," said a barely heard Casey over the crowd. "An NSYNC 2 Backstreet Boys Reborn duet is seriously a fortuitous and epic accomplishment." "I don't know, Case," yelled Artorius over the roar of the crowd. "Can you really call 10 people singing a single song a duet?" Casey chuckled. "Touché, Arthur. Touché." A massive explosion of lights and color echoed in the halls of the Collin University's modern Coliseum as Taurus Green, standing amongst light, dancers, and fog, let her hand fall as the climactic crest of her final crescendo crushed her completely captivated spectators. The glisten of sweat creased her brow, and her chest heaved, panting as she beamed at the crowd. She took a bow as those under her spell smothered her with applause. Monson was right there with them, whooping and hollering with everyone else. He finally understood why Taurus was the new it girl. "Hot, ha!" Casey yelled through bellowing catcalls. Monson nodded.
Totally hot.
Unbelievably hot.
She's a total cow.
What?
Answered all three boys, whipping towards Indigo.
Are you having fun, Collin?
Taurus's voice blared through a microphone that was way too loud. As such, Indigo's explanation for her outrageous comment sunk under the weight of hundreds, maybe thousands of answering voices. Monson marveled at the crowd and their response. It must be nice to be loved.
Well, we aren't done yet. Mr. Gat, why don't you get out here?
On cue, Mr. Gat came trotting up to Taurus's side, mic in hand. He replied to her, though any details were inaudible. He threw a hand around her shoulder, giving her a little squeeze.
Taurus Green, everyone.
Mr. Gat took a half step back, throwing his hand out and sweeping it across his body, like a product model from The Price is Right. Taurus took another bow as the decibel level reached somewhere between a jackhammer and a jet engine. Laughs broke out as the pop idol gave her history teacher a booty bump and playful smile over her shoulder. She ran back towards the curtains and disappeared a half second later. The energy in the place hit new heights as the excitement level reached its peak. Adults and students alike were on their feet, hollering their admonition and respect. It was some time before Mr. Gat could get the crowd under control.
Now that we have your full attention,
Mr. Gat almost screamed to have his voice heard over the crowd.
I would like to introduce you all to someone.
A stint of uncertainty made its way through the whooping holler of the massive crowd, swimming against the current of known and comfortable. Minds kicked into analytical overdrive as they started to question the identity of this mysterious visitor. Mr. Gat smiled deviously as he noticed the perceptible change in his audience's state of being.
Mr. Gibson, if you would be so kind.
The effect of this simple statement was so completely unexpected that the degree of tension tightened as the name Gibson came from hundreds of parted lips. Casey whistled, agreeing with the spectator's sentiment.
Arthur, you don't think he means Aaron Gibson, do you?
Artorius looked just as dumbstruck.
I don't know who else he could be referring to.
Monson rolled his eyes. He did not know who Aaron Gibson was, so, of course, he was the only one that did not know the significance of this particular development. He tried to get his friend's attention.
Case, Arthur, I know you're probably getting tired of answering questions like this, but who is Aaron Gibson?
A screeching noise, like fingernails digging into an unsuspecting chalkboard, forced voices and bodies to recoil as hands flew to people's ears and eyes closed. A ubiquitous sight greeted the reporters, guests, and student body when they finally opened their eyes. MIBs, dozens and dozens of them, filed through the aisles of the Colosseum, marching like the remnants of the German Reich. They moved in unison, gesturing sharply as they made their way down the rows, their sunglass-covered faces holding no hint of personality. Each MIB came to their respective position and stopped. They slapped their hands to their sides in unison, turning their attention away from the stage. They all stood motionless, watching the crowd of people from beneath pitch-black lenses. Their final maneuver also marked the end of any perceptible noise, the traces of their sound waves echoing slightly and dissipating.
I bet you're wondering who these sharply dressed individuals are.
Mr. Gat's voice was falling upon them, but it felt like it was coming from another world, being beamed around like Scotty in the Enterprise.
Hey, Case, Scotty was on the Enterprise, wasn't he? Do you know if he did the beaming, or was he the one that always got beamed?
What, Grey?
What do you mean, what? Star Trek, the Enterprise, Captain Kirk? Any of that ringing a bell?
No, Grey. Sorry, bro.
Casey sounded like he feared for Monson's sanity.
Thank you, Mr. Gat.
A theatrical mix of killing and brightening color met a confused crowd as they searched for human movement. Bright spotlights flared and buzzed around like drunken bees. until what seemed like a randomly picked moment when they focused on the back of the domed space. The massive screens to either side of the stage flared as the figure of a man waltzed towards Mr. Gatt. Mr. Gatt watched him patiently until this man was within distance. They greeted each other with hushed voices. "So, Collin?" Mr. Gatt's voice split the air like a cleaver. "Do we have your attention?" The crowd roared in response. "Then please take it away, Mr. Gibson."
"I'd be happy to, Mr. Gatt."
Monson's ears recoiled. The man's voice was raspy and guttural. Not a nice voice at all. A very sharp contrast to the soothing tones of Mr. Gatt. The man continued speaking.
"I have someone that wants to meet you all."
The man looked at his watch.
"And I think it's about time for him to drop in."
The clinkering tinker of machinery led the disconcerted audience members to turn skyward and gape in surprise once more. A massive hanging platform descended from the ceiling. An unseen camera zeroed in on the frame of a man wearing a dark suit, a dark mask, and dark gloves.
"Ladies and gentlemen, students and teachers, reporters and paparazzi, I have the distinct pleasure to introduce to you Christopher Barati."
Gotcha. You didn't think I'd do that to you after mentioning it was a double episode, did ya? Here we go with episode 24, part deuce. I am Christopher Samuel Barty. A feeling of shock and confusion permeated the air as the audience sat completely dumbfounded. The collective thought was plain to see on the face of every individual. Christopher Barty, the one and only, was here, at Collin, riding a suspended boardwalk floating towards the concert-like setup in the modern Colosseum, as if he were taking a leisurely stroll through the forest. Of all the unexpected developments, this surely topped the charts. The projection screens focused in on the man who is said to be one of the most influential on the planet. As one would envision, Christopher Barty's dress was immaculate, yet very odd. An expensive-looking dark crisp suit with an Oxford white shirt and black silk tie were basic enough. But that is where normalcy decided to check out and go on vacation. Moving down, the perfectly pressed cuff transitioned seamlessly into black leather gloves that glistened slightly from the passing stage lights. Lastly, in a true show of neurotic behavior, Christopher Barty wore a mask. A black leather mask with holes where the eyes and mouth should be. It was the type of mask that would not be out of place in a bank robbery or carjacking. He spoke in an earthy tone that was warm and experienced. Monson was not surprised when the tone came off as familiar. Casey, as always, was the first to cite the obvious.
"Dude, what's with the mask? Is he just being melodramatic or what?"
Artorius and Monson reposed, leaning towards Casey.
"There's no way of really telling."
Artorius adjusted his massive frame in his too small seat.
"Maybe he's just really ugly. Who knows?"
The three boys snickered. The floating scaffold lowered noisily, the churning of gears highly audible. The concussion wave created from the CEO of the Barty conglomerate's sudden entry still weighed heavily upon people's minds. After all this time, to finally make an appearance, and in the most dramatic of ways, was absolutely, positively unbelievable. The breath of the crowd seemed to draw and release in unison as they waited. After what felt like a multitude of lifetimes, Christopher Barty's airborne barge touched down and connected, clicking as it docked. All eyes focused as he walked towards his assistant, Aaron Gibson. Gibson did not waste time as his boss neared him and fell in behind as Barty took center stage.
A wise man once told me that power is a function of reality. He said, if you lack power, whether it be the power to control your circumstance, power to subvert your weakness, or power to withstand trials, that all you must do is attack your reality. It was the authentic and overwhelming reality of hatred and corruption that the Allies faced in World War II when evil men tried to overcome decency and peace. Those of the greatest generation fought and overcame that reality by replacing it with one of their own. Time and time again, the faith of individuals in a common cause has brought about change. You are the harbingers of that change. The youth of each generation holds the unique position of progenitor and sentinel of the future. The future that will happen with or without you. Education is the one true way to attack your reality and safeguard that future. You, Collin University students, have an unprecedented opportunity to shape the future as leaders in every field possible. You can attack the current reality by becoming cognizant of the strength of your position. 6 months ago, my reality was attacked when unknown assailants caused destruction to my lifelong dream. My bridge, Barty Bridge, was not just a mass of concrete and steel. It was a collective ideal formulated and constructed in preparation for the unification of the human race.
He sounds like he's running for president.
Artorius for a second time leaned in, gesturing to Monson and Casey.
Maybe he's announcing his candidacy, or getting ready to rule the entire world. Take your pick.
Casey snickered.
Regardless, the mask might make it difficult to pull in those campaign contributions.
Artorius beamed.
Yeah, I can see it now. Christopher Barty for president. If you don't vote for him, you're a maskist.
Casey shot Artorius a sideways glance.
Maskist?
Artorius smirked outlandishly.
Of course, a maskist. Someone who discriminates against people who wear a mask.
The boys choked back laughs as applause exploded around them. Mr. Gatt was back, appearing seemingly from nowhere. He stepped to Barty's side.
Shall we give Mr. Barty another round of applause?
The crowd did so enthusiastically.
Mr. Barty, in the spirit of change and reshaping reality for the better, please tell the students what you have in store.
Barty's face broke out in a supple grin that was easily visible despite the mask.
Change?
He laughed.
We are going to change everything. We are going to gut Collin to the core and turn it into a truly unique institution. An institution that will pave the pathway to the very future that has been entrusted to you. Mr. Gibson, if you please.
Christopher Barty basked in the admonition of thousands of people as computer-generated images rippled across the surface of the massive screens. Buildings, many of them new and stylized, one after another came in a picture show presentation. Reporters, students, teachers, and spectators alike jumped to their feet in a standing ovation as the final edifice slithered into place with the project name and author embossed upon it. It read, Rejuvenation Project 2012 to 2020, the Barty Conglomerate for Building a Better Future and Overcoming the Shadows of Our Forefathers.
I think it's ridiculous. Collin doesn't need another rejuvenation project.
Monson, Artorius, Casey, Indigo, and some of her friends sat around the dinner table reconvening after a very long day. Post-concert and project announcement, the staff forced the Collin University students back into mundane routines of classes, clubs, and after-school activities. The football team was especially vigorous, as the rigorous security checks conducted over the past week kept them from the practice field. This interruption was particularly vexing to Coach Abel, who thought that football was more important than breathing. In light of the coach's obsession, it was not surprising after the first day back to full practices for both the varsity and junior varsity to see Artorius and Casey with one foot in the grave once they finally made it to the GM's main cafeteria. Indigo, on the other hand, not being a part of any club, committee, or after-school group of any kind, was perfectly energetic, spouting all sorts of speculation and commentary on the week's events.
"What are you on about, little Harrison?"
Casey poked half-heartedly at some fried chicken.
"I mean, the Barty Rejuvenation Project is going to completely redo this school? Did you see those pictures? He's going to double the size of the campus. He's going to add a technology center."
"Hold up, Indigo. You make it sound like that's all a bad thing." Indigo sneered.
"You'd better watch it, Grey. You're already on my list."
Monson cocked the eyebrow. "Your list?"
"Yes, my list. Don't make me repeat myself."
Monson's eyebrow clicked up a notch. "Right." Artorius spoke up. "Indigo, why are you so pissy?" "Our father and Christopher Barty are huge business rivals. Indigo has a tendency to take business relationships personally." The group in one motion turned to the source of the voice. Cyan stood, not smiling as usual, just behind her sister. She took a seat next to Indigo, the latter grumbling as she did.
"I don't take it personally."
Indigo sneered, casting Cyan an annoyed expression.
"And this has nothing to do with Daddy. I just think it's pointless to completely redo Corrin's campus."
When no one commented, she continued.
"There's like 4 buildings left at Corrin that haven't been gutted from top to bottom, but he's gonna redo them? Doesn't that seem kind of redundant to anyone?"
Casey's response was swift.
"Not if he's really trying to expand the size of the school. The housing alone would be a problem. The barracks is huge, but it's not operating at capacity as is. They aren't even using the Western dorms."
"Indigo." The sound of Cyan's voice instantly quelled the younger Harrison. "The Western dormitory isn't up to code. It isn't livable. That's one of the reasons that Barty is finishing it up."
"It still seems fishy to me."
"That's because you have an overactive imagination." For a second time, an unexpected voice joined the throng of conversation. Ignace was standing a ways off from their table, looking the worse for wear. Propped up by crutches, Ignace's right leg was in a large white cast. Jumbled voices spilled from gaping mouths, all spluttering on the words.
What happened to you?
Ignace rolled her eyes as she chewed on her lip. "You all wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Does it have anything to do with this morning?" asked Monson before anyone else could reply. "You were pretty frazzled when you ran into us right after first period." "I ran into you? After first period?"
"See, Arthur,"
said Casey, garnishing the conversation.
"Ignace didn't even remember running into you this morning. That's how insignificant you are."
"Shut it, Casey. And she didn't run into me. She almost ran into you and Grey."
"Casey! Arthur! Shut up!" Monson glared at them angrily. "Ignace is trying to talk." Monson about-faced were focusing on Ignace. "You were saying, what happened to you that is so unbelievable?" A smile touched Ignace's face. A feat, in Monson's opinion, considering Ignace smiled almost as much as Cyan, and everyone knew how happy Cyan was. As expected, Ignace appeared to be out of practice, as the simple gesture was completely saturated with irony, like everything had come full circle once he proffered that simple statement. Monson was not buying it. There was a story here, and he wanted to know what happened to her. Nevertheless, he did not want to embarrass her or put her on the spot. He decided to give her a way out. "You don't have to say anything, Ignace." Monson attempted to avoid the cynical expression that was quickly conquering Ignace's features. "I don't want to pry. You can just forget I said anything." In an odd turn of events, Ignace's face again altered. What was once cynical was now genuine, if not impressed. The significant difference in her overall countenance was startling. It made her come off as a great deal more approachable. It's not that big of a deal, Monson. It's just a little on the embarrassing side. I wasn't feeling well this morning and I tripped, twisting my ankle when I did.
Monson's eyes narrowed in disbelief.
You're kidding. And they thought it was necessary to put a cast on it? Crazy embarrassing, right?
Monson shook his head.
No. Crazy weird. I'm not a doctor or anything, but they usually don't put a cast on unless you have a broken leg.
Indigo broke in.
You didn't break your leg, did you, Ignace?
A vibrating in his school jacket distracted Monson from Ignace's answer. He grabbed for his phone, noticing the little flying envelope as he did. A silly grin made its way onto Monson's face.
Taurus.
He touched the read icon on his phone.
Hey, loser face. Did you see me perform? Wasn't I totally hot? Come on, tell me I was totally hot, winking smiley face.
Monson rolled his eyes, but found the smile on his face widening dramatically as he touched the reply button.
Taurus, we talked about this. Nobody talks like that. It's almost as bad as your hot little piece comment. If you're going to fish for compliments, you have to be a bit more subtle.
Monson waited impatiently for the reply.
So, you're saying that I wasn't hot? First you don't want to stare at my boobs, now this? I get it. I'm fat. I think I might cry. Crying frowny face.
Monson started to chuckle.
That's not what I'm saying.
Monson sent the message and started to set his phone down when another little envelope flashed immediately across the screen. He cocked his eyebrows, speaking in a whisper.
That was fast. You have a really stupid look on your face right now. What? Spouted Monson aloud. What are you talking about, Taurus? That doesn't make any sense.
Just as he said this, he noticed the name attached to the text. Cyan's phone. Monson suffered from an extended moment of blubbering confusion in which he tried to figure out what was happening. This text was not from Taurus. It was from Cyan. But Cyan was sitting next to Indigo, which meant... Monson raced through the mental chain reaction, moving quickly to the conclusion, as he already knew what it meant. He shifted uncomfortably and brought his gaze up, leveling it at Cyan. She was already staring at him. Their eyes met as Monson touched the reply button. Without looking down, he typed,
Don't try to knock other people down because of your own inability to smile. And didn't I tell you that we shouldn't speak to one another?
Monson pressed the send key, not faltering in his current staring contest with Cyan. He watched as her gaze flickered downward to read his text, her eyes whipping back and forth across her phone's screen. Her face changed as the ever-so-persistent scowl, Cyan's trademark, deepened the longer she stared at the screen. She reestablished their eye contact a half a second later as her fingers flew across the phone's keypad. Her message appeared moments later.
Oh, so you can speak to Taurus, but not me? I didn't realize you were such a fanboy. And don't lecture me about smiling. What reason do I have to smile?
Monson felt a pulse of anger. What did she have to smile about?
Stupid, ungrateful girl. Just look in the mirror. You'll find plenty to be grateful for, he thought.
He started typing.
I don't know. How about the fact that you are breathtakingly beautiful? Why don't we start there? Oh, and how did you know it was Taurus I was talking to?
Monson pushed send and waited patiently as Cyan started reading. Her curtain of black hair obscured part of her face, making any expression mostly unreadable. He turned his attention to her body language, hoping that he might ascertain something from the nervous flexing of her hand or the pinky she was nibbling on. Time passed. He was not sure how long. Minutes, hours, days, lifetimes. He really did not know. Finally, a message flashed across his restless screen. Except, it was not the one he was waiting for.
So, what are you saying?
You're in love with me. I knew it. Smiley face.
Monson might have been surprised, interested, or intrigued if it had been any other time, but he could not let Taurus's teasing distract him. Not now. His shoulders slumped, his attention drifting back to Cyan. Apparently, she was still riveted by his last text as he found her in the exact same position, head down, shoulders hunched, face almost totally blocked from view. Truthfully, the only real perceivable difference in her statuesque state was the white-knuckled grip she had on her phone. He felt a renewed sense of irritation as he scrutinized her. Seriously, what was with this girl? In one quick motion, a motion that did not proceed through the regular internal checks of inappropriate and appropriate behavior, Monson picked up a tater tot and chucked it at her. It smacked her head, much of the cakey potato smushing upon contact. Another one of those long, everlasting silences settled over the moment, growing exponentially as Cyan raised her head. He met her flummoxed face with solid conviction. He could tell she was angry, or, at the minimum, trying to come across as angry. Unfettered, he reached down to his plate, picked up a second tater tot, and again tossed it at her. Cyan's incredulity found new heights as the food hovered in slow motion. A hand, barely seen, flashed across his line of sight, causing him to blink in reaction. When he was able to focus again, Cyan was holding the partially smashed processed potato in between two fingers, a half smile breaching her lips. Monson shot her a huge grin and a sideways glance. He bowed his head in respect to her accomplishment. Being able to grab something that fast was pretty out there. His grin widened when she shook her head and nodded back. The half-smile remained just that. He snapped his fingers in disappointment. Shoot, he thought he almost had her there. Guys, shut up! Casey's voice interrupted the moment. He put a cupped hand to his ear. Now, what do you suppose that is? A crashing noise flooded through the main cafeteria doors, answering Casey's question immediately. The MIBs were back, marching neatly through the entrance, overrunning the massive cafeteria. Through the swarm of bodyguards, assistants, and attendants, the CEO of the Barty conglomerate walked calmly, conversing carelessly with his number 2, Aaron Gibson. Barty, still dressed in his black suit, gloves, and mask, strolled unconcerned through the open doors. His presence shut any and all conversation down like a plumber attacking a particularly simple leak. It was so quiet in the room that the clip-clap of a woman's heels rebounded buoyantly through the hall. Miranda Blake glided noisily behind Barty and Gibson. Barty's own conversation trailed off as he turned charismatically on the balls of his feet. He smiled knowingly as he surveyed the students. You know, if you all get quiet every time I enter the room, you're gonna hurt a CEO's feelings. Barty sniffed playfully. Monson almost started laughing. Here was one of the most powerful men in the country, play-acting in a private school of secondary education students. And if that was not weird enough, he was now cracking jokes? Regrettably, Monson could not quite get his giggle to manifest. The atmosphere was still a bit too heavy for that. Barty seemed to notice this, as next he said, Not quite enough, huh? He put a hand up to his mask as if he were rubbing a beard. Then, trying to snap his fingers, he said, How about a joke then? Let me think. He rubbed at his face again. Okay, I think I got it. 3 nuns walk into a bar. A hand from behind grabbed and spun Barty on the spot. Miss Blake had a hold of him and was now whispering conspiratorially in his ear. Obviously the students could not hear, but the guesswork to figure out what she was saying was not exactly rocket science. The students gazed on as Barty pulled sharply away. What do you mean that's a horrible joke? That's a great joke.
Miranda grabbed him again, whispering for a second time. Once she finished, he pulled back to look at her.
"No way,"
said Barty, his tone disbelieving. Miss Blake nodded her head.
"You're trying to tell me that all I have to say is, Corn University football rules?"
The main cafeteria at Corn University erupted as the football players, cheerleaders, and bandies exploded into cheers. They whooped and hollered, clapped and clamored, yelled and yodeled, all for Christopher Barty. The jubilation was infectious and eventually made its way around the room. Stomping feet and smacking hands gushed as Barty made a florid bow, smiling for all to see. Monson finally let that laugh out as he watched. Things returned to normal from there. Conversations broke out among the different groups and people went back to eating. Barty did not exit, however, but set out around the room, meeting and greeting the different students.
"How does Miss Blake know Christopher Barty?"
asked Indigo as she attempted to spy on them.
"Doesn't that seem weird to anyone else? You sure are paranoid today. You seriously have issues." "Shut up, Cassius."
Casey glared at Indigo in a mix of surprise and confusion.
"Why is everyone calling me Cassius? Your sister calls me that too."
"What? You don't know?"
"Ha!"
Indigo adjusted herself smugly. "I can't believe you don't know. Well, I'm not going to tell you."
"Indigo?"
"Yes, Cassius."
Casey smiled serenely.
"You seem to be laboring under some sort of delusion that I care what you call me, but here's an FYI. I couldn't give a rat's wrinkled butt."
Indigo scowled, her cheeks flushing with anger.
"Oh, you know what, Cassius? I don't know if my sister hit you too hard or—"
"Well, it's good to see that the youngest daughter of Guy Harrison has inherited her father's tenacity."
Indigo froze, her face tensing ludicrously as she did. She continued to stare forward for a half-second, while everyone else glanced towards the source of the voice. Christopher Barty smiled beneath his mask at the searching faces of the students, taking a step closer to their table.
"You kids mind if I sit with you for a spell? This old body isn't what it used to be."
Two of Indigo's nondescript friends moved to either direction, sliding away from one another, making space for Barty to sit. What followed was incredibly awkward. Barty did not seem interested in speaking to the students about anything specific, or at all for that matter. Really, he just sat there, glancing around periodically and grinning in an unconcerned way. The atmosphere took a turn for the worse when Barty's goons closed in around him, glaring at the students with imposing, unseen eyes. The heavy gloom surrounding the table spiraled as time lapsed on, the passing minutes on the clock eking by, becoming excruciating to bear. Eventually, Indigo did her best to strike up conversation amongst her friends, but met with little success. No topic seemed significant or relevant while Barty sat there. It was as if many of the mundane and petty concerns that hampered them daily lost all importance in the face of something bigger. Ultimately, the privileged teenagers were just a bit too taken by the mysterious Barty. Inwardly, Monson wanted to distance himself from the situation, escape to his room perhaps, but predictably, his curiosity beat out his discomfort. Barty was a complete enigma, even more so than Monson, which was saying something considering he could not remember much of his past and was probably psychotic. Regardless, one thing was certainly true. Molly was right about not making a fuss unless it was absolutely necessary.
"So, Barty, gotta ask, bro, what's with the mask?"
Cassius K's voice cleaved the heavy air like Gimli's battle axe from Lord of the Rings. And not the sissy one they showed in the movie, but the big one that was supposedly prevalent in the books. There were very few times in his life Monson could remember being totally speechless, especially considering that his current lifetime was only a few months. But the moment those words left Casey's mouth, he could actually feel his throat tighten. They all waited anxiously for Barty's reaction. To their utter amazement, he laughed.
What's your name, son? Cassius K? But you can call me Casey. Everyone does.
K, huh? Barty looked Casey up and down as if to size him up.
That wouldn't happen to be a K from KK Securities, would it?
Casey's eyebrows furrowed.
Yeah, that's the company my great-uncle started.
Barty laughed a second time and turned abruptly to face Artorius.
So, that would make you Arthur Payne, the son of Celine Pomerane, would it not?
Artorius nodded slowly.
Yeah, but how do you know your mother? I've met her a few times in her shop in Paris. Lovely woman.
Barty's attention shifted again, glancing at each of them in turn as he said their names.
So, the heir to KK Securities, the daughters of Guy Harrison, and the son of Celine Pomerane? You all go to this school, and your friends?
Cyan, Indigo, Casey, and Artorius all affirmed their answer, though it was obvious that they were more than a little baffled. Barty chuckled again in a very ironic way as he addressed Miss Blake.
Miranda, why didn't you tell me that you had such influential students?
Miss Blake merely scowled sardonically, plainly indicating how disinterested she was in the proceedings. Barty ignored her silence and continued inquiring about the different students around the table. Monson had to wonder if he was reading too much into the situation, but it felt as if Barty was purposely avoiding him, or maybe saving him for later. At long last, Barty's attention turned to Monson, smiling at him cheerfully, even going as far to get up and move so he could sit directly across from Monson. At roughly the same time, an impression came to Monson, an impression that made him understand before Barty even said anything.
And this is...
You know who I am, Mr. Barty. Monson spoke in a low, docile whisper. You knew before you even came over here. So, why don't you go ahead and drop the act? You're not fooling anyone. While reading a facial expression through a leather mask was not exactly an easy task, Monson knew that he was dead on. Barty knew exactly who he was. It's not like I'm hard to miss, Monson thought. Barty was here for a very specific reason, and that reason had to do with Monson.
How do you know I'm here to talk to you?
I don't know. I just do. Something about your mannerisms told me.
My mannerisms, you say?
Yeah, your mannerisms.
Marcus told me that you were a smart one. I was assuming that it was just book smarts, but apparently, you're just as good at reading people as he was. Is there anything else that I should know about? Any other skills or talents?
Not that I know of. Barty smiled.
Excellent. I'm not very good at dealing with surprises.
Monson smiled back. I don't doubt that. Monson and Barty's innocent exchange was incredibly strange. Small talk of unparalleled duplicity skillfully hid the true aims of either combatant. Christopher Barty was careful in both word and gesture, and was doing all in his power to avoid any sort of point or conclusion with Monson. The latter grew so tired, he just went for it. Not that speaking to you isn't interesting or anything, but I have a headache. I would like to return to my room. So, why don't you tell me what it is I can do for you, Mr. Barty? Why are you here? Barty sighed but smiled a defeated smile. He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table.
You have a bright future ahead of you, Mr. Grey. A bright one indeed.
Thank you. Monson made to pick up the envelope, but stopped right before he did. You know, you never did answer Casey's question, Mr. Barty.
And what question was that, Mr. Grey?
What's with the mask?
Read the letter, and I will tell you.
Monson's eyebrow shot up. How about a hint? Barty smiled, But if Monson was being honest, the word smile did not really cover the mixed, hollow emotion coloring the thin lips of Christopher Barity. A smile is supposed to convey joy, happiness, pleasure, and delight. Any one or all of those things. But if a smile is reserved for happy emotions, then why did Barity appear so sad? Barity finally spoke.
A hint. You really are like your grandfather, Mr. Grey. I will give you a hint. Let me just say this. We all can't be as brave as you.
Without another word, Christopher Barity stood up and left, Miss Blake and Aaron Gibson in tow.
You've been listening to the podcast-only novel of The House of Grey by Collin Earl. For more news, information, and updates, please visit houseofgreybook.com. Music by Figure of Fiends. Visit the band at myspace.com/Figure of Fiends. Cover art for The House of Grey provided by James Thane. More information at THAYN.net.